I went to a reading the other night and this girl got up and said, "Tonight's my birthday," and everyone like screamed and clapped, and like I realized it didn't matter what she read after that, like they already loved her. And then I realized I would never be able to read on my birthday because it's a holiday, and I thought about lying to you guys just so you would love me. So can I do that?
Tell us birthday, we already love you.
I still want to do it though. Tonight is my birthday. Thanks. So now it doesn't matter if I read total crap. Thank you. This is an excerpt from a story called Powerhouse. Powerhouse. There was a time I hung out with this shit group of kids and they were just such shit. This to say I made some mistakes, like breaking into this one guy's car, like stealing the stereo out of that car. I was young and I didn't steal the stereo because I wanted the stereo, but stole it rather because I wanted the guy. This to say I just wanted something the guy owned. This more to say that nothing else mattered in that moment except this thing the guy owned, this thing which I now know was not the guy. Anyway, there was nothing else in the car. Had there been a jacket, I would have stolen it. Had anything else jarred loose, a mud flap, an ashtray, I would have stolen that too. But the stereo was the only thing I could snap out of its hole. And so there I was, drunk and standing on the sidewalk at 2 a.m., the bar closing, the drunk stumbling out, holding a car stereo with both hands, just some kind of person I didn't even know I could be, and my friend said, "Run." This to say, I made a mistake. Not because I got caught, because I did not get caught, because no one ever once got caught, because this was Baltimore. And if you know the place, you know what I mean. I mean, if you know the place, you're likely from there. I mean, you're likely still there, which I no longer am, which doesn't mean I've got it figured out. It only means a window appeared and I went through the window before it disappeared. Metaphorically, I mean. It's not time for anything deep. We're talking about this mistake I made, how I feel like shit that I stole that useless stereo, how I can't make myself feel better. Why tonight? Because it's night, because I'm bored, because I'm awake and thinking the thoughts I think at 4 a.m. Me, some guy, and it's always the same. Me, some guy, and we're lying around a bed like teens. Then one thing another, his hands on my face, his face near my face, and just before it all starts up, I'm yanking a stereo out from its hole. I'm backing out ass first from the car. My friends are screaming, "Run." To say I shouldn't have stolen, but I'd fallen hard for the guy whose stereo it was. And when I fall hard, I fall like the proverbial ton of whatever. And by fall, I mean I splinter everything around me. Another might call it apocalyptic. By another, I might mean the guy himself, the victim. I mean the guy headed fast away from me. He might use the word apocalyptic when cracks form in the asphalt, when windows shatter, when women cover their daughters' eyes, when he floats upward to heaven. I'm not being melodramatic. You've never been there to see it. And this time, like every time, the entire world had splintered. And because he'd been all night in the bar talking to some girl, I was splintering within this splintered world. It was very complex. It involved complex orchestration. Like if he stood there, I stood here. Like if he looked at me, I looked away. And on and on and on. God, it was summer and it was 100 degrees. This is not an excuse, but I'm just saying. It was 100 degrees and my friend said run, and we all ran up the street to my car, all of us too drunk to drive. And there were 6 of us kids squeezed into the car, 2 up front, 4 in back, and somehow I ended up in the back even though it was my car. Somehow I ended up sitting on some guy's lap, the stereo, on top of mine. And somehow one of the guys ended up in the driver's seat and he started the car and drove closer to the guy whose stereo I stole's car, and we sat there. And the radio, meaning the piece of shit radio in my car, was playing something from that summer, and the kids up front were singing, and there I was in the back of my car, some guy I didn't even like's hands gripping my hips. I didn't know then what we were waiting for sitting there outside of the bar. I mean, we were waiting for the guy whose stereo I stole to walk out. We were waiting for the guy whose stereo I stole to get into his car and see that his stereo was gone. But then what? I mean, what were we going to do about it? That was the thing. That was always the thing. I had the stereo, but now what? We had hooked up, me and the guy whose stereo I stole, in the front seat of his car the week before I stole the stereo, and the week before that. And the liquor those nights was doing its thing, and the stereo was doing its. And the guy did this thing those nights where he tilted his head too far to one side when he moved in toward me. And there was something about this, nothing new. That brilliant spinning in one's gut that no one knows how to describe. That everything inside inching up, and this is why I wanted him. And by wanted, I mean I wanted to own him completely. I wasn't dumb. I knew that stealing someone's stereo was not the way to own a guy. I knew that the way to own a guy was to push something down, push something else out. I knew that the way to own a guy, I know that the way to own a guy still years later is this. Like recently there was this incident. There was this guy whose car I scraped by mistake with my car. It was raining that day, a downpour, and the guy whose car I scraped by mistake was big and standing on the sidewalk holding his sagging bags of groceries. He was waiting for me to move my car so that he could get into his. I mean, I'd parked so close he couldn't get into his car, and he was waiting in the downpour burdened with his sagging bags, annoyed. And when I backed up my car, one hand up, giving the obligatory wave, the obligatory thanks for waiting, I scraped his car with my side mirror because of my shit parking job, and I heard it scrape even through the sound of the radio, even through the rain and the windshield wipers squeak. And before I shut off the car and before the rain refilled the windshield, I saw the guy drop his bags of groceries to the wet ground and smack his forehead with both hands. I knew I had a choice to make, and I knew the right choice was to get out of the car. And I knew I had another choice to make, and I knew the right choice was to be a guy. And as the rain refilled the windshield, I knew I had to open the door. And as I opened the door, I heard first the downpour, then heard the guy calling me certain names reserved for women, certain names I'd been called before and would be called again, certain names I'd eventually later, not too much later, call others. And as I stepped out of the car, I was suddenly some very small thing, by which I mean I was suddenly a woman to this guy, suddenly absorbing those names reserved for women, suddenly nearly crying at this point, now standing in the downpour, reduced to something now small and just as tightly coiled. And so my choice had been made. I wanted to be a guy. I mean, I wanted to be a certain type of guy, but instead I said, stop yelling at me. And he said, stop being a fucking whore. Which, what the fuck? I wanted to laugh. I wanted to say, is that the best you can do? I mean, it was raining and we were standing in it, and it didn't look like it would stop. And his groceries might have slipped at any point from the bottom of their sagging bags and floated off. And the world could have come, is what I mean, at any point to the standstill we'd been waiting for. And this would have been his finale, whore. But the point is not this. The point is I wanted to be a guy, by which I mean I wanted to get up in his face. I'm not talking about anything deep. I'm talking about a generic performance of guy. I'm talking about strapping on the proverbial pair. But I never had to, because there was a second guy walking down the sidewalk, and this is the point. This second guy was walking down the sidewalk, and the second guy had seen the whole thing, had seen me scrape this first guy's car, had seen the first guy smack his head and yell at me, and the second guy walked up to the first guy and called the first guy an asshole. And the second guy got up in the first guy's face and told the first guy to get the fuck in his car, said there wasn't even a scratch, said, I'll call the cops if you do not get into your piece of shit car right now. And the second guy asked me if I was okay. And the second guy called me certain names reserved for women, certain other names I'd been called before and would be called again. And it was then I became some sweet thing. And it was then I pushed something down, pushed something out. And it was then I knew I owned the situation, meaning I knew I owned both guys. It's not something I want to explain. If you've got the parts, you understand. As for the rest of you, thanks.